Hi again, everybody. I'm Jamie Allison, and this is the Big Idea, Big Moves podcast. This is a destination for high performers. We talk to people from different genres, just different niches, just people doing really cool things in their space that we can hear a bit about their journey and what they're doing, and hopefully translate some of those things into our own lives. So we talk to lots of athletes, we talk to CEOs, we talk to professionals, entrepreneurs, all of those different people. And again, people that are just doing interesting things that we can hear a little bit more about their journey and see if we can use some of those in our own lives as well. So I know I have one of those guests today. Really interesting stuff, I think, coming up today too. Just before we jump into that, if you've been listening to the podcast for a while, you know that we have a relationship with Epitome Sportswear, and that's where I think for a whole bunch of different things, it fits well with our kind of whole life success, way of looking at things, because it's great if you want to do performance stuff, but it's also great if you just want to maybe, go catch your son's hockey game or your daughter's soccer game or whatever it happens to be. You'll be able to find something there. But the other thing that we really like is that they give back to the community they serve as well. And they're working to impact the inequities in opportunity for girls and women in sport. And so for that reason, a portion of their profits go directly to organizations and initiatives that support girls in sports. So, check them out. You can go to our Instagram profile and you can go through there. And I know there's a percentage off there, or just go directly to Epitome Sportswear. That's EPITOME sportswear.com. And today I've had Maddison Illsley with us today. She's a member of the Great Britain women's bobsleigh team. Her debut wasn't that long ago now, I guess, internationally, and it was memorable for her at the time because her and her pilot, Nikki McSweeney, at the time achieved a wider podium finish at their first competitive international race together, and that was in Norway. But we're going to talk a bit about that, but also that Maddison also juggles her athletic pursuits, which she's doing a lot of kind of intensive stuff on right now, but also managing her career as an engineer and in change management too. So, so some really cool stuff there. And first of all, just wanted to thank you for taking some time. We were talking just before we came on that you're actually today's one of those rare days off when you're kind of doing competition and things like that. But thanks for joining us, Maddison.
Hi, thank you. Yes, today's one of those nice days off that's sometimes very neat.
Yeah, well, we've actually had a couple of people that are in bobsleigh on the show before, and so people probably have a bit of an idea. But one of those things that is interesting about the sport is that a lot of people have done different athletics and things like that before they found bobsleigh. How did that work for you? Like, how did the sport find you, I guess?
Well, actually, it's also quite interesting. They back in the UK, we tend to it's not a big sport. We don't have
Mhm.
a lot of snow. It's
Yeah.
not that cold. So recruiting to find like athletes for bobsleigh is a little bit trickier.
Mhm.
But I actually saw an advertisement on Instagram for it a few years before I actually ended up starting.
Yeah.
Um, just before the games in 2022, and my mum sent it to me. She thought it would be like a really good idea that I would try because
Yeah.
like I love running and training, so it'd be like a mixture of both heavy gym stuff plus fast like sprint stuff.
Yeah.
Uh, so I sent like an application and I tried to have a conversation, but at the time there was no funding. They were obviously preoccupied with the games. I then got back in touch with them a few years later, which was early last year,
Mhm.
um, and got invited to a like kind of an introductory day, which went really well. Um, and that's kind of how I found the sport. And then I
Yeah.
started training summer testing events, and last year was my first season on ice.
Yeah. Well, very cool. And maybe tell us about the first time. I mean, when you talk to people about it, a lot of people think, what would it be like? Because I think if they haven't had much exposure to the sport, I mean, it's extremely fast and it's probably more predictable for you, but it would feel like to a lot of people very unpredictable how kind of it works. So tell us what was the first run like for you? Like, what does it feel like to go through, go hurtling down a mountain at that speed?
It's definitely a different kind of feeling. It's definitely not one you can replicate without being on ice.
Yeah.
And just a lot of pressure. Like
Yeah.
there's a lot of Gs that you pull going around, especially some of the large corners, and it kind of is very like rattly. Like
Yeah.
and to be honest, it's dependent on the ice. Sometimes you have really rough ice and it feels like you're just shaking.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden you'll get pushed down and going around the corner.
Yeah.
So yeah, I guess it's like being flung down an icy hill in a toolbox
Yeah, yeah,
sometimes.
that's a great way to put it. It's interesting because I know I've asked other people, and it's and I think some people think, oh, is it just like a really fast, like an amusement park ride, or is it like a roller coaster or something? But no, it's the jamming back and forth, I think, and the feeling of being thrown around like that. That's the first time I've heard kind of that way of talking about it, because I think that's what's different for a lot of people. They don't realize it's going to be so rattly, I think, going down.
Yeah, it's definitely and it also that depends on the track you're at as well.
Mhm.
But yeah, it's definitely a bit rattly. But once you get very used to it very quickly, and then you can
Yeah.
start, and you can brace and you can lean into the corners, and all of those things help your downtime as well.
Yeah.
So once you do get used to it, it becomes very like you're a bit more relaxed, I guess, and then it's not like it's easy.
Yeah, yeah. Now, what was because obviously it was a new sport for you when you went to, I'm assuming you went to like a push trial or something like that they do, and uh, you know, what did you find it was? How was it different than some of the other things you've done? Because there's a lot of explosiveness, but there's also a lot of power and things like that. How was it different from the other things you had done before going to your first event?
It really encapsulates the like being powerful and being strong.
Yeah,
Um, being fast and being able to move, and there really like is no other sport that encapsulates both those in the exact same way.
yeah,
um the bob is really heavy. Like our bob, a minimum weight two woman is 170 kilos. Like that's 170 kilos. Even if you split that between two of you, that's still a lot of kilos to move
yeah,
quickly.
yeah,
Once you get going, you've really got to be pushing it, running fast behind it. So you've got to really have to have the strength and power to move in the first place, but then the speed to keep it moving and keep it going quicker. Otherwise,
yeah,
you'll slow it down. So
yeah,
it's such like I think it's a really nice combination of needing both and using both to help each other. Um, and I think that's quite like a special thing that you just wouldn't see in another sport.
yeah, yeah. Well, and even training for that would be quite different because you're not focusing only on one of those two things. You have to have, I guess, both the explosiveness and the and being able to lift, like basically be able to move weight quickly. So, really different thing, I would think. So,
Yeah, yeah. So the training definitely it pulls together both of those.
mhm,
I thoroughly enjoy that. It means I get good amount of gym time, good amount of track time, and
yeah,
like our sessions are fun. There's some Olympic lifting. There's also some like hardcore, just lifting, and like
yeah,
shifting weights and that.
yeah,
But I think that's what I really enjoy about being able to do both those things, and it doesn't one of those doesn't overpower the other. You really have to work hard on both for them
yeah,
both to work.
yeah. Very cool. And so the other thing that I mentioned it a little bit before is that you also do kind of what other people, especially in like an amateur sport, I guess from that perspective. I know there's sponsorships and all those things, but you have to work and you have a career and all of those things too. But you have a career that I think is also a little bit different because it's that kind of STEM type of role, which I think is important to talk about a little bit too. So tell us about how do you kind of manage those two? Because you're an engineer by trade, I guess, and have been doing that for a while. So first of all, how do those two things work together, and how do you balance them?
The balancing is definitely that's the hard part. I think my job, I love my job, and I wouldn't want to kind of quit that, and I wouldn't want to just step away from that entirely. I love the fact that I can go home, I have a career, and it's separate.
Yeah,
Um, something else to focus on, something more kind of like intellectual and thinking to focus on, like outside of bobsleigh. But
yeah,
actually, when you come across both of them, there's quite a lot of engineering,
mm,
like things we work on within bobsleigh as well.
yeah,
So like we build the sleds ourselves, we take them apart, like do what we need to do with those. There's a lot of like changing shims and like leaf springs and things like that to make them work best for whatever particular track we're at. So I actually find a nice crossover between them both, balancing real work, like my real kind of career work. I really try and do it in times that I can. Like now we have a day off. I've done some work this morning, then I've gone to the gym, and like on days where I can and days where like I need to do it, I put meetings in for the free time and try and catch up, or like try and work around it that way. To be honest, the company I work for has been very, very supportive and very open-minded with Bobsleigh. Kind of like, otherwise, most jobs would be like, maybe don't go out the country for 6 months at a time.
Sure. Yeah.
I'm supposed to be working. But I have regular catch-ups with people at work, and I try and work on things as much as I can, or like whenever I can, to bring them through whilst I am here.
I would assume, I mean, I know that you also spend time and, talking about, women in STEM and also kind of having that balance between being able to do some of your other pursuits, whatever they are. There must be a lot of like, I'm sure young girls are looking at, oh, that's really cool that you're able to do those things and you're able to talk to them even from just an engineering standpoint and doing some of those roles that are sometimes difficult to get more women to go into those fields. So what's that been like for you? And is that hard to know that people are probably looking to you to kind of help build that, and moving forward?
I don't think it's like, I really see it in that way. The way I kind of see it is, if anyone wants to ask questions, or I'm so happy to talk to people about it. Because like even when I was in school, like growing up, it was definitely one of the lesser taken subjects by women. And I remember in like one of my classes, there was just 2 women, and there was like everyone else was like guys. And so it's definitely still there, and I would really love to do more, to be honest, about bringing like women in STEM up and kind of really not pushing it in a way that I don't want it to look boring. The one thing that people kind of assume is that kind of subject can be really boring and things and I don't know where that kind of goes wrong, but it's not. It's just sometimes it's usually the whole picture. So I think if people wanted to ask questions, that would be like fabulous, because I just want people to know what it really is and what it really looks like. What do I actually do for a job is probably different to what you think an engineer might do, or the kind of projects that I do might be different to what someone else does. So asking everybody to see what their view is, what their view on this subject is actually like, probably it gives you a good idea of what it really looks like.
Yeah, even having more kind of exposure to it, regardless of who it is, like, and more the variety in it, because I mean, not only is the role different, but the companies you work for are different, and what they do is different, and all of those things too, just like any other, occupation. But being able to understand it better is probably a big part. So
I think there's definitely some understanding that can come from like different types of companies. I work in a different type of company than like other people would work in, and they are so vastly different. They're in their own sectors, and everyone that works in that kind of sector, even between us, will all do different things still. And projects. So like being open and being able to see what everyone's actually doing is really good. And I think we're starting to get there. We're starting to kind of show what people really do and what like engineering or STEM as a career really looks like. Know that my company does a lot of work in STEM and talking to other people and talking to younger kids and going into schools and speaking openly about what it really looks like.
Yeah. Well, that's very cool. And one of the things that I because you are so busy and you have so many things, I wonder, from a goal setting standpoint, is that like, I'm assuming that you have very specific kind of athletic goals that you probably have to work on all the time, but how do you do that yourself, knowing that you probably have career goals, you have, your athletic goals? How do you approach it? Are you somebody who writes everything down, or you just kind of go with the flow a little bit? How does that work for you?
They're always in my head. I know exactly what they are, and they've changed a lot. Timescales have changed a lot, like consistently all the time. Like after one season, it might change. After one summer of being back at work fully, it will change. But I kind of know the direction I want to go in generally, and that is for both athletic and for career.
Mhm.
I know generally where I want to go, and I'm kind of try and work on the smaller. I've got big goals in mind, like
Mhm.
in mind. I know
Yeah.
where I want them to, but for me, the smaller ones, by having to balance both, um, I really split my time on the kind of like near future goals instead of the further
Yeah.
future goals.
Yeah.
Because
Kind of incremental because they change so much right now.
yeah, it's incremental. The end goal never changes really. Just the path to get there will change. Timescales will change, and things like that. And I have to just really see what I'm able to do right now about getting to those goals.
Yeah. Well, and you're at a point now where there's lots of opportunity that comes up, and you have to be able to be fluid enough to be able to take the opportunities when you can. So that's a good thing too. So, um, one of the other things that is there's a mental preparation side, and I don't know how much you like. Some people, especially from a sporting standpoint, say, they do the physical side, obviously, you what you have to do at the gym, you have to do all those things. How do you approach the mental side of your performance from that end? Like, do you have a regular kind of thing that you do, or is it just something that you go with it as it comes?
I guess there are certain aspects of things that I do um, to prepare. I'm quite like particular. I like to do things in a particular way.
Mhm.
Like I always bag ready the night before, and that will make sure mentally I'm ready, so that I don't have to think about as much the next day. Things like that. Listening to certain podcasts and songs, like they kind of like put me in the right mood.
Yeah.
But in terms of like just thinking about it all the time, I suppose not all the time. Like I
Yeah.
try, but because I'm generally thinking about quite a lot of different things.
Yeah.
Um, then it's more short term, and it's more like physical things that I can do to put my mind in a better place for it.
And so one thing is, I know that you had some injuries at one point, quite a few years ago. But I think if people knew that and know kind of where you've come from to where you're in this type of thing, where it is like heavy lifting and all of those things, tell us a bit about that and how it affected you with some injuries that you had before.
Yeah, I broke my back a good number of years ago, and at the time that I broke it, I actually didn't know it was broken for about 18 months.
Oh,
So I was
geez.
just roaming around, carrying on with sport, doing everything with a broken back without realizing. And I ended up getting like certain symptoms of having a back problem.
Mhm.
Like my feet would go numb, my legs would start to go numb if I stood up or was walking for too long.
Yeah.
So we ended up to a hospital, or like just to see someone about it. And the first instance they said was it's scoliosis, and I was like, oh, okay, like scoliosis, that's fine.
Yeah.
I got braces. I think I probably had about three of them, which I didn't like at all. And then nothing was changing. So we went back to a different specialist, and they did an MRI, and they basically turned around like, yeah, your back's broken. Like you're going to need some surgery. And in my head, I was like, well, I've been fine for 18 months. Do I really need surgery now?
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh, we're like, yeah, you do, because otherwise you're looking at like a paralysis
Yeah.
situation.
Wow.
So I had recovered, and I had kind of certain goals in my mind where I wanted to recover in a certain amount of time so that I could do other things I already had planned. I had like this 4-week outward bound course planned,
Yeah.
which I really want to go on. So I had to make sure that I was recovered and able to do it by then, which was
Mhm.
I think about 8 months later, 8 months after the surgery. I really worked hard at like physio and like everything to make sure that I could be prepared for that.
Yep.
Then I actually ended up getting completely discharged 364 days after I had the operation.
Oh,
I wanted
wow.
it to be here and be finished. But actually, no, I think um, that has been a really, obviously, that's like a pretty big thing. I was
Yeah.
17, and to get back to training, to get back to lifting heavy, and I'm like really proud of like the numbers and things that I can lift. And I
Mhm.
know that numbers don't mean everything, but after that kind of injury, to be able to come back, be that strong, and be able to like know that I can take that load is kind of good for good for like my head. Like I
Yeah.
know that I can force, which is nice, but also just it builds confidence. It builds real confidence in like my ability. Like I know that I can do more. I know that it's like it's just not the end of anything. And I think
Yeah.
like I think I posted something the other day, and I was talking to my mum about it, and people make excuses, and they make excuses all the time, and like I've never. That's the first post I've ever done about my back, and only people that I knew at the time would have known I'd had it done. Really, and it was I just never want it to be an excuse as to why I couldn't do something, and so I just never told anyone. And actually, it's and for me, it's I forget I forget I did it. I forget it happened. It's just a thing.
Yeah.
But like if it could have, I think the way I was with my parents about it, the way we kind of wanted more afterwards, it really brought me back into being able to like have no excuse and just be able to work as hard as I could to get back into a place where I could do what I wanted to do.
Yeah.
I just wanted to do what I wanted to do. And sport, I've always done sport, so getting back into sport was kind of a no-brainer
Yeah.
for me at the time. So
Wow.
I just sure it never became something that I'd look back on and be like, yeah, well, I broke my back, so I just didn't do it. I want it to be like, yeah, I just broke it. It's fine.
Yeah. Well, it could very easily have defined kind of your, could have defined your life moving forward because you may have not done athletics. You may have not done, I mean, even not, I mean, you're at a level that's completely different, but even just kind of how you moved forward might have been completely different if you had have thought about it differently, I guess, at that point.
Yeah, I think that was probably one of the like obviously mental barriers and like mental toughness comes in all the time. There's always situations. It could be home. It literally could be anything. That was one that it never struck me to give up. Like for some reason that one never I was has never been an excuse, and that never like I was never had the mental state at that point that I would give up, and that would be a reason why. That was more
Where
of
does
a
that
like
come from, Madison? Where like do you think that's is that was that in always in you? Is it something that, that you think you've just found over time? Where does that mental toughness or resilience come from?
I think as we were growing up, my family or my entire family, I have a brother and a sister, and we were all so busy. We were all doing something all the time. And so we all wanted to do as much as we could and be as good as we could at it. Truly nothing was impossible. It didn't matter what it was, how it would happen, anything, but it would happen. It would just, and it, there was never kind of and these were things like athletics. My brother was rugby, like my sister dance. We would all do different things, but there was never an impossibility that we couldn't be absolutely great at any one thing.
Hmm.
And so there was never a kind of, there was never a giving up attitude in our house. And that would be with schoolwork. That came with everything. That attitude never kind of, it was just never there. And so I think having that, it meant that it doesn't even cross your mind because
Hmm.
you're never around it. And I would see it in like other people. I would see it in like friends. People get to an age and they quit their clubs or they quit whatever they were doing.
Yeah.
But we always carried on. We always tried to do as much as we could to be as best as we could.
Yeah.
So I think it definitely comes from both my parents and just the family and like the household. It was just like that for us.
Yeah, yeah. It's always interesting because it's finding a lot of people in have who have done something really big or have done kind of big things. It's often there is something that kind of something to how you're brought up and what how open your mind is to making sure that you don't have limitations, I guess. And it's interesting that you went through such a big thing, which most people wouldn't know. And but if people do see your sport in particular is one that people would wonder how does that even happen after breaking your back or something like that. And so it's pretty cool that you've got to where you are after that.
Yeah, it's definitely not the type of sport you would like kind of assume.
Yeah, like lifting, pushing, and running and all those things, and then rattling around inside it too afterwards. So, one of the things is, if as you're going through this, have you had mentors that kind of stand out as like, is that something that do you just take bits and pieces away from people? Have you had a couple of people that you really kind of look up to and or have looked up to to have some of the success you've had so far?
Yeah, I mean, there's I try and take as much from anyone.
Yeah.
I'll take advice from anyone. Advice because it's personal, and it could be bad advice and it could be good advice, but you don't know that until you've at least heard it.
Hmm.
So to make a judgment on what advice you take from someone early on is difficult. So I always try and hear and listen to what people have to say, and then I can make my own decisions on what I think. And it could literally be that someone's wording doesn't work for me, and that's it.
Yeah.
And that's fine. But if I can hear it, then I don't take the risk of missing out some valuable information that I might really need, or might really even just need to hear at the time.
Yeah.
Um, like I've got people around me now where, like, my current pilot Adele, she's great. She's her like her story on her own is something like very big and like
Yeah.
very inspirational way. And then like you've got people in my career that I talk about and I talk to. Um, I've had some really good career like mentors over the years, and like one really stands out to me right now, and she's now in a different company, but her like just her views on things and the way she can explain is really good, and
Hmm.
that's really good for me. And then my parents, I talk to them all the time, and like just everyone you talk to, there's other people in Bobsleigh that I can talk to, that if I needed any advice and I'd speak to them, or that I'll just listen to what people have to say,
Yeah. And being
just
open
to
to learn.
yeah, like if you're not open to just hearing it in the first place, then you kind of close yourself off to a lot of different things that people just say things in like nice ways, bad ways, but some of them can really stick
Yeah.
all the time, and you want at any point. So
Yeah. Well, very cool. Okay. Well, thank you. One thing that we ask everybody is, and when we have a guest, just a couple of kind of actionable things, which I know, we've talked through lots of that as it is already. So I'll kind of go back to, because obviously it's one of the things that you have is that have to balance kind of work, obviously your athletic pursuits, which are a little different than kind of some people. It's just, but let's think of this relatively generally, because the other thing is that you've got I'm sure you're young, you still have a personal life, you also want to kind of be with friends and things like that. So for somebody who's struggling with that a little bit, and do you have a couple of tips on how to try to successfully balance some of those things and have kind of a whole life kind of ability to do those things?
I really like writing things down and kind of making a calendar and like my to-do list, and usually I have a few things I need to do and I can block out my time in the right way. So like I'll always try and prioritize the things I need to do, like work. I need to do work and talk
Mhm.
to people and things like that. I also need to train. So those kind of priorities do kind of take over, but things like making sure my sessions don't take too long so that I can get back and do what I need to do. And then I just make sure in the evenings that I talk to my family, I talk to like my friends, and that's kind of when, depending on my time, like sometimes that doesn't work. Sometimes the day is just too to do that. But as long as I know, or I try and book it in as much as I can, not then I know I'll try and get it. I'll talk to as many people as I can and kind of keep the balance. The balance will go. Um, it just will. Sometimes it's going to be
Yeah.
difficult all the time to complete a complete balance. That would, for me, I know that would never work. Things change too often. But not putting off those people that you need to speak to or know you want to talk to, and really, like, I know it's so easy to come home and be like, yeah, I'm tired, like I don't want to talk to anyone, but sometimes they can also make you feel a lot better.
Yeah.
And even just a quick 5 minute conversation is good. I
Yeah.
do that to my with her if I need a 5 minute, if we just want a 5 minute conversation. I do that with my sister, with my friends, my housemates. Like, yeah, and that the evening time is the time when I try and fit those in.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and it almost matches what you were talking about before about having the big picture stuff. It may not always be exactly, look like that every day to day, but if you always have that, then you've got to make sure you take care of all of those different things and do your best to balance them depending on what's busiest in your life at that time too, right? So
Yeah, I think it really like comes down to, I know it's easy to be particular and be like, right, that's not worked, and take that badly.
yeah,
But I think what I've definitely learned over the beginning of this season, last season, is that if I don't schedule in my time, then I'm the only one that's going to take those repercussions. If I don't get my work done, I'm still the only one that's going to take those repercussions if I don't train or if I don't talk to people. And just in every way, like talking to someone, if that makes you feel good, then that's something to do and to prioritize. If finishing off your to-do list at work is something that I know for me, that makes me feel pretty good and like makes me feel like that sense of accomplishment, same with a gym session, then I need to prioritize doing those things on time, in time, and then I will start to feel better as well. um and that's definitely what I've learned, is taking on and understanding that it's up to me and I'm still the only one that's gonna change for. It's the only one, I'm the only one that they're going to affect. It doesn't matter if anyone else does it, that doesn't affect me that much, but I'm the one that can affect what I'm doing. So
yeah.
I do
Uh,
really do try and keep.
Yeah, it's a great way to look at it because I think a lot of people think they're doing it for other people, but in most cases it's no, it's you. You have the end consequence at
Yeah.
whatever happens one way or the other. So um, so just kind of to wrap, do you tell us about kind of what's happening right now? Like what does the next little while look like you from bobsleigh standpoint, so that people and also how can people follow you and follow kind of what's happening from that end?
Yeah, so for bobsleigh, we are no, we're not. We are in Norway at the moment. We've got 2 more races left of this Europa Cup.
Hmm.
Then we go to Eagles, and after that, we do go to training in Germany in Winterberg just before Christmas. We get home Christmas Eve, but spend a little time at home, and then we're back out for another second half of the racing season from January. So yeah, we've got races coming up. We've got World Cups, Europa Cups, and North American Cups. So it's a lot going on, and I'm really excited to have a full racing season this year.
Yeah,
Um, Aside from that, like we are struggling a bit for funding, that kind of thing. I know,
yeah,
like I myself, which is very expensive, and
yeah.
I at the moment, GB Bobsleigh doesn't have any funding for our 2 women teams.
Hmm.
So as a brakeman, I don't get any funding to be anywhere. So I use my wage from work and like my savings, what I've got, to try and keep myself on ice. Because the one thing with bobsleigh is the only time you can learn some things at home, but
Yeah,
you have to be on really to make those improvements. And because we can only be on ice 6 months of the year, the 6 months that we can be is really crucial to be. But obviously that comes with expense. I'm not at home. I've still got a mortgage I need to pay, things
yeah,
like that.
yeah,
Um, so yeah, that's the next few months for us.
yeah. Well, and that's important for people to know because I think a lot of people like they'll watch the Olympics and see kind of all of those things, but they don't sometimes understand, especially in those sports. It's I mean, it's you having to get a lot of scholarships or sponsorships. It's you having to help generate some of that and find your ways of getting to training and all of those things. So so kudos to you, but also hopefully other people are kind of hearing some of that and getting that message across that there's some really cool stuff happening there, and you need to be able to get some support to do it too. So that's a good thing to get out there too.
Yeah, it's definitely quite a big misconception about it's an elite sport and a lot of them are funded.
Yeah.
This one in particular is not for us.
Really?
Some other nations have funding for their bobsleigh teams, but because we're quite small and we're coming back, then we don't have any, especially for our 2 women teams.
Yeah.
So I try and fund it myself, and it's one of those things where it's either that or not going, and I would rather go because it's something that I want to do and it's part of a goal that I want to achieve.
Yeah.
So but we're trying to find sponsorship all the time, trying to work with people, do what we can, and like just really push the sport out there because it's a great sport. It's something that encompasses so many different things, from like technicality of the sleds on their own,
Yeah.
um like obviously the athletes themselves and things like that, then it can really be very, very interesting.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's an interesting, not a widely known one yet.
Yeah. Well, I mean, so I'm in Canada and we know bobsled pretty well, but they still struggle with some of the same things about, dollars and all of those things. But it's one of those things that I think if people see it and kind of realize what it's like, that it's pretty easy to really enjoy watching and everything too. So there's a certain amount of, it's I don't want to say dangerous feeling, but it is a little bit. It's kind of like there's an excitement around, what happens each time and everything because of the speed and kind of what's happening. So so hopefully you can get some more of that before as you go along and make it a little easier on yourself that way too. So how do they follow you? How do people follow you and what you're doing, Madison?
So my Instagram and Facebook is the same, and it's just my name, Maddison.Illsley.
Yep.
And my LinkedIn is the same as well.
Okay.
Um,
Great. Well, and what we'll do is we'll put the links in the show notes too. So if people want to follow you, they can do that and get exposed to the sport if they haven't been. So that's pretty cool too. So again, I know you've been really busy lately. So thank you for taking the time, but thanks also for sharing kind of all of your journey and what you're doing. It's pretty inspirational stuff. So thank you, Madison.
Thank you very much. Thank
All
you.
right. And to everybody else, if you haven't hit subscribe on the podcast, do that now. We have great people every week, just like Madison. And we'll talk again soon on Big Idea, Big Moves.